The Empress was forbidden to love until a human soldier taught her to live. It was a line from an old Terran ballad Kalen had hummed once during a perimeter check. Mostly off-key, but looking at Empress Valaxia now, standing rigid against the bioluminescent ferns of the Luminar Groves, I realized the universe had a terrible sense of irony. Valaxia of the Ethelgard ascendancy did not shiver. Her biology, a marvel of silicates and exothermic regulation, was designed for the stillness of deep-crust caverns, not the humidity of a diplomatic garden tour. She stood like a statue carved from a moonlight, her dermal scales shimmering with a faint, iridescent frost. To her people, she was the Icebinder, a sovereign required by the oath of ice to remain untouched, separate, and eternally cool. To Commander Kalen Vance, she was just someone standing in a draft. Honestly, that is the thing about humans. They do not see gods or monsters. They see problems that need fixing, usually with snacks, blankets, or high-velocity rounds. Kalen shifted his weight, his standard-issue boots sinking slightly into the violet moss. He was scanning the tree line, his posture relaxed but ready. He was the only human in the delegation, a token gesture of the new alliance. The Ethelgard Royal Guard stood 10 paces back, stiff and ceremonial. But Kalen was right there, practically in her personal orbit. They called humans fragile. It was the galaxy's favorite joke. We lack the carapace of the krill or the regenerative jelly of the slimes. But looking at Kalen, with his rolling shoulders and the sheer radiating furnace of his mammalian metabolism, fragile wasn't the word that came to mind. Valaxia could feel him. That was the problem. Her internal monologue was a chaotic mess of diplomatic protocols screaming in terror. The Ethelgard possessed sensory pits along their jawlines, sensitive to thermal gradients. To Valaxia, Kalen wasn't just a bodyguard. He was a walking bonfire. Every time he stepped closer to whisper a security update, a wave of heat washed over her left side, causing her primary heart to flutter in a way that was medically concerning. "Clear right, Your Highness," Kalen murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in her chest plates. "We should keep moving. The atmospheric scrubbers are cycling. It is going to get chilly." "It is acceptable, Commander," Valaxia replied, her voice clipped, trying to maintain the regal distance her ancestors demanded. "The cold is our natural state." Kalen glanced at her. He didn't look at the crown of crystalline shards hovering above her head. He looked at her hands. Her fingers, long and elegant, were twitching, a microspasm caused by the rapid temperature drop of the Grove's artificial weather cycle. Terran empathy is a bizarre evolutionary trait. It is a biological imperative to nurture things that aren't even their own species. It is the instinct that makes a human pack bond with a cleaning drone or coo at an apex predator. "I don't mean to overstep," Kalen said, breaking the silence that Valaxia had spent 300 years perfecting. "But you are turning gray at the edges, ma'am." Valaxia stiffened. "My dermal pigmentation is responding to—" "You are cold," he interrupted gently. It wasn't an accusation. It was just a fact, like gravity or taxes. And before the Royal Guard could hiss in protest, before Valaxia could recite the verse of the oath that forbade physical contact with a lower life form, Kalen moved. It was pure muscle memory. The culture shock didn't even register for him. He simply unclipped the thermal clasp of his field jacket. The fabric was heavy, synthetic weave, smelling of ozone and that distinct, musky scent of a warm-blooded creature. He didn't drape it over her shoulders. That would be too intimate for a public setting. But he held it out, creating a windbreak between her and the ventilation ducts blasting freezing air. "Just stand behind me for a second," Kalen said, shifting his stance to block the wind. "I run hot." Valaxia froze. She ruled a star system, but he protected her soul in that moment, shielding her not with plasma shields, but with his own body heat. The contrast was staggering. She was sharp angles and cool indifference. He was soft edges and radiating warmth. From her perspective, the world narrowed down to the broad expanse of his back. The heat radiating off him was intoxicating. Her scales, usually locked tight, relaxed reflexively, absorbing the thermal energy. It felt illicit. It felt like standing on the surface of a sun. I I do not require shielding, Commander, she lied, but she didn't step away. She actually leaned in, just a fraction of an inch. Sure, Kalen said, scanning the dark canopy above them. But humor me. Humans get nervous when VIPs turn into popsicles. Bad for the paperwork. He was joking. She knew he was joking. Yet his hand hovered near his sidearm, his eyes tracking a rustle in the high branches. He was entirely relaxed and completely lethal all at once. That was when the first blaster bolt sizzled through the air, turning a fern beside Valaxia into ash. The transition was instant. The human bond is often forged in quiet moments, but it is tempered in fire. Kalen didn't shout. He didn't panic. He simply collapsed the distance between them. Get down, he growled, no longer the polite diplomat. He spun, shoving Valaxia behind a heavy stone planter. But he didn't cower. He placed his body over hers, a living wall of warm, fragile flesh between the Empress and the assassins descending from the canopy. Valaxia stared up at him. His heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic, powerful rhythm that sounded nothing like the slow, hydraulic pulse of her own people. It was chaotic. It was terrifying. It was the warmest she had ever been in her life. They called humans fragile. He proved them wrong by saving a queen. The air in the luminar groves turned into a screaming vacuum. The obsidian sect wasn't using standard kinetics. They were using star siphons, nasty little gravity wells that tore matter apart atom by atom. Kalen wasn't firing back anymore. He was hunkered over me, his weight pressing me into the moss. I could feel the vibrations of his chest as he shouted into his comms, a stream of Terran tactical jargon that sounded less like military code and more like a desperate prayer. Stay down, he grunted, wincing as a shard of planter stone skittered off his shoulder plate. Just stay small. It was absurd. I was Valaxia, the Icebinder. I was 6 feet of royal apex predator, capable of freezing the moisture in the air with a thought. And yet this soft, squishy mammal was trying to make himself into a human shield, as if his flesh could stop a gravity collapse. But that is the thing about the human bond. It ignores physics. A canister landed with a heavy thud just 3 meters from our cover. It hissed, a violent purple light bleeding from its seams, a destabilized star siphon charge. I calculated the blast radius instantly. It would liquefy us both. Kalen saw it too, but he didn't run. He didn't grab me and flee. He looked at the grenade, then he looked at me. His eyes were wide, the pupils blown, filled with that terrifying, illogical human determination. Sorry about this, Your Highness, he whispered. He didn't wait for permission. He lunged, not away from the danger, but directly on top of it. He kicked the charge into a depression in the ground and threw his body over the blast zone, curling into a tight, armored ball. The detonation was muted, a dull whoomp that shook the ground like a sickening heartbeat. Kalen was thrown backward, skidding across the moss like a rag doll. Silence rushed back into the grove, broken only by the belated arrival of the Ethelgard Royal Guard, their heavy boots thundering against the path. They secured the perimeter in seconds, neutralizing the remaining assassins. But I didn't see them. I only saw Kalen. He was lying on his back, his armor scorched and smoking. The silence from him was louder than the explosion. I moved. For 3 centuries, I had moved with the grace of a glacier, slow, deliberate, majestic. Now I scrambled on my hands and knees, tearing through the pristine ferns, not my ceremonial robes snagging on thorns. "Commander!" I gasped, my voice cracking. It was a sound I hadn't made since I was a hatchling. I reached him. His chest plate was cracked. Underneath, the fabric was torn, and I saw it, red, bright, vibrant crimson. Human blood. It looked so hot against the cool violet of the moss. The High Synod arrived then, flanking the guards. I could feel their collective stare, the weight of 1,000 years of tradition pressing down on the back of my neck. The oath of ice was clear. The sovereign must not be touched by the unclean. The sovereign must not mourn the transient. Valaxia, the high priest intoned, his voice stepping delicately around the carnage. Step away from the alien. He is damaged. It is unseemly. Kalen coughed, a wet, rattling sound. His eyes fluttered open, hazy and unfocused. He looked up at me, and a crooked, pained grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. Did I get it? He wheezed. He wasn't worried about his internal organs. He was asking if he'd done his job. An assassination attempt reveals the galaxy's most dangerous power couple, but only if they survive the paperwork. I didn't answer the priest. I didn't look at the synod. I looked at Kalen's hand, resting limp in the dirt. It was trembling, shock setting in, his internal furnace failing. He was cold. The realization hit me harder than the shock wave. The source of all that warmth, that baffling, radiant heat that had terrified me 10 minutes ago, was fading. Screw the oath. I stripped off my gloves. My scales, usually hard as diamond, softened in response to the distress. I reached out and took his hand. Then, I placed my other hand directly on his cheek. The collective gasp from the synod sucked the air out of the grove. I was breaking the most sacred law of the ascendancy. I was touching a lower life form. I was engaging in thermal transfer. "Valaxia!" the priest hissed. "Silence!" I snarled, the temperature in the grove dropping 10 degrees in an instant as my stress response flared. My eyes never left Kalen's. His skin was rough, covered in grit and sweat. But as my hands connected, I felt it, the faint, stubborn thrum of his pulse. I concentrated, pushing every ounce of my own bioenergy, my own reserve warmth, back into him. It was a reverse of our biology. Usually we took heat. Today I would give it. "You are not allowed to die, Vance," I whispered, my forehead resting against his scorched armor. "That is a royal command." Kalen blinked, his vision seemingly clearing as the warmth of my hands shocked his system back online. He looked at my fingers interlaced with his, then up at the horrified faces of the High Synod, and finally back to me. He squeezed my hand. It was weak, but it was there. You're breaking the rules, ma'am," he rasped. "I'm rewriting them," I replied, my voice shaking with something that wasn't cold at all. I stayed there, on my knees in the dirt, holding the shattered human soldier while the galaxy watched. They thought they were seeing a queen stoop to help a servant. They were wrong. They were watching a woman realize that she could burn down the universe, but she would rather just keep this one ember burning. She ruled a star system, but he protected her soul. And as the medics finally swarmed in, pushing me back but never breaking that line of sight, I knew the oath of ice was gone, melted by the most terrifying force in the galaxy, a human heart bleeding red on the violet grass.